Students, myself Divya Kumari Meena. Let us continue the story. A cup of tea. A cup of tea. There was something simple, sincere in that voice. It wasn't in the least the voice of a beggar. Then have you no money at all? Asked Rosemary. A young girl asked some money for a cup of tea, and then Rosemary felt that it was not the voice of a beggar, and she asked that girl if she don't have money even to buy a cup of tea. Then madam came the answer, and she replied that she don't have enough money to buy a cup of tea. How extraordinary! Rosemary peered through the dusk, and the girl gazed back at her. How more than extraordinary! And suddenly it seemed to Rosemary such an adventure. It was like something out of a novel by Dostoevsky, this meeting in the dusk. Supposing she took the girl home, supposing she did do one of those things she was always reading about or seeing on the stage, that would happen. It would be thrilling, and she heard herself saying afterwards to the amazement of her friends, I am simply took her home with me. As she stepped forward and said to that dim person beside her, come home to tea with me. And when that girl denied for having enough money to buy a cup of tea, then uh, then an idea came to Rosemary's mind, and she was thrilled and inspired by the stories of Dostoevsky, in which he described about the about the help in which he appealed to help the poor and do some great work. In that manner, Rosemary took that girl to her home. The girl drew back, startled. She even stopped shivering for a moment. Rosemary put out a hand and touched her arm. I mean it, she said, smiling, and she felt how simple and kind her smile was. Why won't you? Do come home with me now in my car and have tea. That girl, when that girl heard that Rosemary wanted to take her home with her, that girl was surprised and looked at Rosemary. But Rosemary told her that she really wanted to take her home in her car to have tea. You don't mean it, madam, said the girl, and there was puss in her voice. But I do, cried Rosemary. I want you to please me. Come along. That girl was surprised when she wanted to take her home. But Rosemary insisted that she really wanted to take her home. The girl put her fingers to her lips, and her eyes devoured Rosemary. You are not taking me to the police station, she stammered. The police station? Rosemary laughed out. Why should I be so cruel? No, I only want to make you warm and to hear anything you care to tell me. The girl thought that Rosemary wants to take her to police station, but Rosemary assured her that she is not that much cruel. She only want to take care her. Hungry people are easily led. The footman held the door of the car open, and a moment later they were skimming through the dusk. As the girl was hungry, she got ready to go with Rosemary. The driver opened the gate of the car, and after a moment they disappeared from that dusk. Dear, said Rosemary, she had a feeling of triumph as she slipped her hand through the velvet strap. She could have said, "Now I have got you." And she gazed at the little captive she had netted. But of course, she meant it kindly. Oh, more than kindly. She was going to prove to this girl that wonderful things did happen in life, that fairy godmothers were real, that rich people had herds, and the women were sisters. She turned impulsively, saying, "Don't be frightened. After all, why shouldn't you come back with me? We are both women. If I am the more fortunate, you ought to expect." Rosemary felt very happy to be kind to that girl. She felt some ideological thinking about that girl as a wonderful thing. She wanted to prove to that girl that wonderful things happens in life and godmothers are real. She wanted to prove that she also has heart and appeal to that girl not to afraid to her. She wants to help her as if because she is also a woman, but happily at that moment, for she didn't know how the sentence was going to end. The car stopped, the bell was rung, the door opened, and with a charming, protecting, almost embracing moment, Rosemary drew the other into the hall. Warmth, softness, light, a sweet scent, all those things so familiar to her, she never ever thought about them. She watched that other receive. It was fascinating. She was like the rich little girl in her nursery with all the cupboards to open, all the boxes to unpack. And when Rosemary was talking to that girl, the car suddenly stopped in front of the Rosemary's house. They entered in their house, and all the treasures were gathered there. Come upstairs, said Rosemary, longing to be generous. Come up to me, to my house, my room. And besides, she wanted to spare this poor little thing from being stared at by the servants. She decided as they mounted the stairs she would not even ring for Jenny, but take off her things by herself. The great thing was to be natural. She tries to be much more generous towards that girl. She wanted to take that girl into the house unnoticed by the servants, therefore she took her by her own. And there, cried Rosemary again as they reached her beautiful big bedroom, with the curtains drawn, the fire leaping on the wonderful lacquer furniture, her gold cushions, and the primrose and blue rugs. And she showed that girl her room, her bedroom, bed, the luxurious furniture, and the curtains were, and the cushions were there. The girl stood just inside the door. She seemed dazed, but Rosemary didn't mind that. When the girl came inside the bedroom of Rosemary, there was a spark in her eyes to see that luxury in her room, luxurious things in her room. But Rosemary didn't mind that things. Come and sit down, she cried, dragging her big chair up to the fire. In this comfy chair, come and get warm. You look so dreadfully cold. Rosemary asked that girl to sit on a chair in front of the fire. I dare not, madam, said the girl, the edge backwards. She moved backward, saying that she doesn't have dare to sit on that chair. Oh, please, Rosemary ran forward. You mustn't be frightened. You mustn't really sit down. And when I have taken off my things, we shall go into the next room and have tea and be cozy. Why are you afraid? And gently she half pushed the thin figure into its deep cradle. And once again, Rosemary assured her not to be frightened and be comfort and cozy in that room. But there was no answer. The girl stayed just as she had been put, with her hands by her sides and her mouth slightly open to be quite sincere. She looked rather stupid, but Rosemary wouldn't acknowledge it. She leaned over her, saying, Won't you take off your hat? Your pretty hair is all wet, and one is so much more comfortable without a hat, isn't one? There was a whisper that sounded like, Very good, madam, and the crushed head was taken off. But the girl remained stood there. But Rosemary wanted her to become comfortable. Therefore, she asked her to take off her hat. And let me help you off with your coat, too, said Rosemary. And becoming more generous, Rosemary tried to help that girl to take off her coat.